The Discernment Field, Episode 6, Game Theory in Everyday Life, Incentives, Strategy, and the Hidden Logic of Behavior. Hello, and welcome to the Discernment Field, a podcast on mind, behavior, perception, and the search for clarity in an emotionally reactive world. In the first 5 episodes, we moved through what we can call the distortion layer. We explored the crisis of interpretation, emotional intelligence, manipulation, identity capture, and the nervous system states that narrow perception. We looked at how emotion can become the interpreter, how language can steer the body, how belief can become fused with identity, and how stress, trauma, and collapse can reduce our capacity to see clearly. Now the series begins to shift. We move from the distortion layer into the strategic human. Because once perception becomes clearer, another question appears. What is shaping behavior? Not only what people say, not only what people feel, not only what people believe about themselves, but what the environment rewards, what the system punishes, what incentives are operating beneath the conversation, what risks are people managing, what status are they protecting, what cooperation are they avoiding, what advantage are they seeking, what game they may be playing, consciously or unconsciously, while the surface conversation claims to be about something else. The game beneath the conversation, this is where game theory becomes useful, not as a cold reduction of human beings into selfish calculators, and not as a cynical assumption that everyone is manipulating everyone else, but as a lens for noticing interdependence. Most human situations are not isolated decisions. They are relational fields. My choice affects your choice. Your response affects my next move. The group's reaction affects what everyone else dares to say. The reward structure teaches people what is safe. The punishment structure teaches people what to avoid. The reputation field teaches people what role to perform. The system may say one thing, but reward another. This is where discernment deepens. Because sometimes the stated value is honesty, but the reward is silence. Sometimes the stated value is collaboration, but the reward is obedience. Sometimes the stated value is emotional openness, but the reward is pleasing. Sometimes the stated value is truth, but the reward is loyalty. Sometimes the stated value is a public good, but the reward is attention, outrage, power, status, or control. That is the game beneath the conversation. A family may say, we just want peace, but the actual game may be, whoever names the problem becomes the problem. A workplace may say, we value innovation, but the actual game may be, do not question leadership if you want promotion. A relationship may say, I want honesty, but the actual game may be, tell the truth and I withdraw, soften yourself and I return. A social media platform may say, we connect people, but the actual game may be, emotional intensity gets rewarded with visibility. A group may say, we value discernment, but the actual game may be, agree with the group frame or lose belonging. So in this episode, we are going to ask a different kind of question. Not only is this person sincere, but also, what behavior does this situation reward? Not only, what do they say they value, but what happens when someone acts on that value? Not only, what do people claim to want, but what incentives shape the choices they actually make? This is important because many conflicts remain confusing when we interpret them only through stated intention. Someone says they want openness, but repeatedly reacts badly when openness appears. Someone says they want cooperation, but keeps creating conditions where competition becomes rational. Someone says they want trust, but punishes vulnerability. Someone says they want truth, but rewards performance. Someone says they want peace, but maintains a structure where silence is safer than repair. When stated values and real rewards collide, behavior usually follows the reward. That does not mean people are always lying. Often, people genuinely believe their stated values. A leader may genuinely value openness while still unconsciously punishing dissent. A partner may genuinely want intimacy while still withdrawing when honesty makes them feel exposed. A parent may genuinely want family closeness while still rewarding compliance over authenticity. A group may genuinely value truth, while still becoming defensive when truth threatens its identity. This is why the game is often hidden even from the players. People may not know the incentives they are reinforcing, they may not see the feedback loops they have created, they may not recognize that their reactions are training other people. But whether conscious or unconscious, the game still shapes behavior, and discernment asks us to read that field without losing humanity. Because human beings are not just strategic, we are emotional, wounded, relational, embodied, and often confused by our own motives. But we are also responsive to incentives. We adapt. We learn what brings safety, approval, reputation, money, access, affection, peace, status, belonging, or relief. We also learn what brings shame, exclusion, punishment, withdrawal, humiliation, rejection, or loss. So when we enter the field of behavior, we need both compassion and analysis. Compassion asks, what pain, fear, history, or need may be shaping this person? Analysis asks, what is the system rewarding this person for doing? And when those two questions come together, we begin to understand the hidden logic of behavior. What game theory reveals about human behavior, incentives before intentions. Game theory, in simple terms, studies how people make decisions when the outcome depends not only on their own choices, but on the choices of others. It looks at interdependence. It asks what happens when my best move depends on what I think your move will be. It examines cooperation, competition, trust, risk, betrayal, signaling, incentives, strategy, and the consequences of decision-making inside a shared field. That may sound abstract, but we live inside these situations every day. A relationship is a game in this sense. Not a game as in something fake or trivial, but a game as in a field of interdependent choices. If I become vulnerable, how will you respond? If I tell the truth, will you listen or punish me? If I apologize, will the repair happen, or will the apology be used against me? If I set a boundary, will it be respected or framed as rejection? A workplace is a game. If I speak honestly, will I be valued or marked as difficult? If I challenge poor decisions, will the system improve or will my reputation suffer? If I work beyond capacity, will I be rewarded, exploited, or expected to continue? If I perform confidently, will I advance faster than if I express uncertainty honestly? A family is a game. If I name the old wound, will anyone listen, or will I be told to stop causing drama? If I break the family script, will I be seen clearly or treated as disloyal? If I remain silent, will I preserve belonging at the cost of truth? Social media is a game. If I post outrage, will I receive engagement? If I post nuance, will I be ignored? If I perform certainty, will people reward me? If I admit uncertainty, will I lose attention? If I say something emotionally charged, will the platform push it further than something careful and balanced? Public discourse is a game. If a politician says the complicated truth, will people reward honesty or punish weakness? If a media outlet presents uncertainty responsibly, will it gain attention or lose clicks to a more dramatic headline? If a group admits error, will it gain trust or lose status to opponents? This is why game theory can become an everyday discernment tool. It reminds us that behavior is often shaped by incentives before intentions. Intentions tell us what someone says they want. Incentives show us what the situation rewards them for doing. This distinction is vital. Someone may sincerely intend to be honest, but if honesty repeatedly brings punishment, they may become secretive. Someone may sincerely value creativity, but if the workplace rewards compliance, creativity may disappear. Someone may sincerely want emotional intimacy, but if vulnerability is met with criticism, performance becomes safer. Someone may sincerely value truth, but if their group rewards loyalty over accuracy, truth becomes socially expensive. So when behavior contradicts stated intention, it may not be enough to ask, are they lying? Sometimes the better question is, what is the incentive field teaching them? A child who lies may not be naturally dishonest. They may have learned that honesty brings disproportionate punishment. In that environment, secrecy becomes adaptive. A worker who says nothing in meetings may not lack ideas. They may have learned that ideas are welcomed in theory but punished in practice. Silence becomes rational. A partner who avoids conflict may not lack care. They may have learned that conflict never leads to repair, only escalation. Avoidance becomes protective. This does not remove responsibility. Behavior still has consequences, but understanding incentive prevents shallow interpretation. It allows us to see the system around the behavior, not just the personality behind it. One of the most important questions in game theory is, what does the structure make rational, not morally ideal, not emotionally healthy, not spiritually evolved, rational within that system? If a workplace rewards overwork, exhaustion becomes rational. If a family rewards silence, suppression becomes rational. If a relationship rewards withdrawal with pursuit, withdrawal becomes reinforced. If a platform rewards outrage, outrage becomes rational. If a political system rewards division, polarization becomes strategic. If a group rewards certainty, doubt becomes dangerous. This is why systems can create behavior that individuals later mistake for character. We say that person is difficult when the system may be punishing honesty. We say that person is passive when the system may punish initiative. We say people are addicted to outrage when the platform rewards emotional intensity. We say nobody cares about truth anymore when the public environment rewards speed, identity, and emotional performance more than careful reality testing. The individual still matters. Character matters. Choice matters. But the field matters too. This is the difference between moral judgment and structural discernment. Moral judgment asks, is this person good or bad? Structural discernment asks, what conditions are shaping this behavior? Sometimes the answer reveals character, sometimes it reveals an incentive, often it reveals both. Game theory also teaches us that people often respond not to what is happening, but to what they expect others will do. Trust and mistrust are shaped by expectation. If I expect honesty to be punished, I may hide. If I expect vulnerability to be used against me, I may perform strength. If I expect cooperation to be exploited, I may compete first. If I expect others to cheat, I may cheat to avoid being the fool. If I expect the group to turn on me for doubt, I may perform certainty, even while privately unsure. This is why broken trust creates strategic behavior. Once people believe the field is unsafe, they begin protecting themselves against anticipated moves. A partner withholds because they expect criticism. The other partner criticizes because they sense withholding. One person hides information because they fear a reaction. The other reacts strongly because the information was hidden. Each behavior becomes evidence for the other person's defensive strategy. The game reinforces itself. In workplaces, employees may stop telling leadership the truth because they expect punishment. Leadership then says, no one tells us what's really going on, but does not examine what happens to people who do. The silence is interpreted as disengagement, when it may be the rational result of a system that punishes honesty. In public discourse, people may stop admitting uncertainty because uncertainty is treated as weakness. Everyone performs certainty. The performance of certainty then convinces others that they must also perform certainty to remain credible. The whole field becomes more rigid, not because everyone is truly certain, but because the game rewards certainty and punishes humility. So the discerning question becomes, what does the game make people pretend? Does it make them pretend to agree, pretend to care, pretend to be calm, pretend to be certain, pretend to be loyal, pretend not to notice, pretend not to be hurt, pretend not to need, pretend not to know? Games produce performances, and performances can become culture. This is why the gap between stated values and lived incentives matters so much. A group may say it values truth, but if the safest behavior is agreement, then the real value is loyalty. A company may say it values well-being, but if promotion goes to those who overwork, then the real value is extraction. A family may say it values love, but if honesty leads to exile, then the real value is image preservation. A relationship may say it values intimacy, but if vulnerability leads to punishment, then the real value is emotional control. To understand the real values of a system, watch what it rewards. This is not cynicism, it is an observation. Cynicism assumes the worst. Discernment reads the pattern. There is a difference. Cynicism says everyone is selfish. Discernment says what incentives are active here. Cynicism says nobody means what they say. Discernment says do the rewards match the stated values? Cynicism says it's all a game. Discernment says some games are unhealthy, some are cooperative, some are mixed, and some can be changed once the incentives become visible. That last point matters. The purpose of seeing the game is not to become manipulative. It is to become conscious. When the game becomes visible, we can ask whether it needs to be changed. If honesty is punished, what would make honesty safer? If cooperation is risky, what would build trust? If outrage is rewarded, how do we stop feeding it? If silence is treated as agreement, how do we create channels where truth can be spoken? If withdrawal is rewarded with pursuit, how do we stop reinforcing the loop? Game theory does not have to make us colder. Used well, it can make us more responsible. It shows us that we train each other. Every reaction teaches something. If someone tells the truth and we punish them, we teach concealment. If someone sets a boundary and we shame them, we teach fawning. If someone expresses uncertainty and we humiliate them, we teach false certainty. If someone manipulates and gets rewarded, we teach manipulation. If someone performs outrage and receives attention, we teach outrage. If someone cooperates and gets exploited, we teach self-protection. So the question is not only what do I want people to do, the question is what am I rewarding them for doing? That is a difficult question in relationships. We may say we want honesty, but do we punish it with withdrawal? We may say we want vulnerability, but do we respond with judgment? We may say we want peace, but do we reward avoidance? We may say we want responsibility, but do we only give attention when someone collapses or escalates? It is also a difficult question socially. We may say we want thoughtful discourse, but do we reward the loudest, most certain, most dramatic voices? We may say we want truth, but do we share what confirms our identity before checking it? We may say we want better leadership, but do we reward performance over substance? The game is not somewhere else. We participate in it. And that is why this episode belongs in the discernment field. Discernment is not only seeing what others are doing, it is noticing the part we play in the incentive field. What do we reward? What do we punish? What games do we enter automatically? What games do we refuse? What games do we help maintain because they give us something? Game theory in everyday life begins with this simple shift. Before asking only what someone intended, ask what the system rewarded. Before judging behavior only as character, ask what made the behavior adaptive. Before believing stated values, examine lived incentives. And before trying to change behavior, look at the game that keeps producing it. Because people may say what they value, but behavior often reveals what the field has taught them to protect. The incentive field rewards, punishments, and hidden pressures. If game theory teaches us to look beyond stated intentions, then the next step is to examine the incentive field. Because behavior does not happen in space. It is shaped by reward, punishment, pressure, risk, reputation, access, status, belonging, conflict, shame, attention, and consequence. People may tell us what they value, but the incentive field tells us what is actually being trained. An incentive is not always money. It can be approval, it can be silent, it can be emotional warmth, it can be social belonging, it can be a status, it can be a relief from conflict, it can be protection from shame, it can be avoiding someone's anger, it can be keeping access to a group, it can be maintaining an image, it can be staying close to someone powerful, it can be not being made the problem. This is why incentives are often invisible. We tend to think of incentives as obvious rewards, a bonus, a promotion, a prize, a visible gain. But in everyday life, the strongest incentives are often emotional and relational. People adapt to what keeps them safe, included, approved of, and undisturbed. They adapt to what reduces tension. They adapt to what avoids punishment. They adapt to what makes life easier inside the system they are in. A child learns the incentive field of a family very quickly. If honesty brings calm discussion, honesty becomes safer. If honesty brings rage, humiliation, withdrawal, or punishment, secrecy becomes rational. The child may not consciously think, I am responding to an incentive structure. They simply learn the rules of the field. Tell the truth, and danger appears. Hide the truth, and maybe peace remains. Over time, secrecy may become personality. But originally, it may have been an adaptation. A workplace functions the same way. A company may say it values initiative, but if the person who challenges poor decisions is labeled negative, initiative will disappear. It may say it values innovation, but if people are rewarded for not disrupting the hierarchy, compliance becomes the game. It may say it values well-being, but if promotion goes to those who work beyond capacity, overwork becomes rational. The stated values may be painted on the wall, but the incentives are written in what happens next. This is one of the clearest ways to read any system. Do not only listen to what it says it rewards. Watch what survives. Watch who advances. Watch who becomes silent. Watch what kind of behavior is praised, protected, ignored, punished, or quietly pushed out. If the system says it values truth, but truth tellers are isolated, the real incentive is not truth. If the system says it values care but exhaustion is rewarded, the real incentive is extraction. If the system says it values collaboration but credit flows upward, the real incentive is status protection. If the system says it values emotional openness but vulnerability is used as leverage, the real incentive is self-protection. This is why people often adapt to the reward structure around them, even when that reward structure contradicts their values. Someone may genuinely value honesty and still become careful, edited, or withholding if honesty repeatedly creates a threat. Someone may value courage and still become compliant if courage costs them belonging. Someone may value kindness and still become performative if kindness is rewarded only when it pleases others. Someone may value truth and still become loyal to a group frame if questioning that frame risks exile. Incentives do not erase values, they compete with them, and under pressure, incentives often win. This is not because people are weak, it is because incentives shape the nervous system. If a behavior repeatedly brings safety, approval, relief, status, or belonging, the body learns. If a behavior repeatedly brings shame, punishment, rejection, or instability, the body learns that too. Behavior becomes patterned through feedback. This is where game theory and control theory begin to overlap. Feedback loops train behavior. A person acts, the field responds, the person adapts. Over time, the person may forget that the behavior was learned. It simply becomes how things are done here. A partner learns that if they withdraw, the other person pursues. Withdrawal is reinforced. The pursuing partner learns that if they chase, closeness sometimes returns. Pursuit is reinforced. The relationship may then complain about the pattern, while both people keep playing roles that the system rewards. A social media creator learns that careful nuance receives little attention, while outrage creates engagement. Outrage is reinforced. The audience learns that emotional intensity is more stimulating than patience. Reaction is reinforced. The platform learns that conflict holds attention. Amplification is reinforced. Nobody has to explicitly choose a worse culture. The incentive structure builds one. A family learns that if no one names the old wound, gatherings remain superficially peaceful. Silence is reinforced. The person who names the wound is treated as the disruptor. Suppression is reinforced. The family may describe itself as close, but closeness has become conditional on not speaking the truth. A community learns that certainty receives praise, doubt receives suspicion, and public loyalty receives belonging. Certainty is reinforced, doubt disappears. The group may believe it is becoming more unified, but it may actually be becoming less capable of seeing clearly. This is why incentives are so powerful. They do not need to convince people philosophically, they train people practically. The hidden pressure often comes through consequence. What happens if I tell the truth? What happens if I refuse? What happens if I question? What happens if I stop overfunctioning? What happens if I no longer play the expected role? What happens if I do not perform certainty? What happens if I do not agree publicly? What happens if I stop rewarding someone's withdrawal, outrage, helplessness, or control? These questions reveal the game. Sometimes the punishment is obvious: losing money, losing work, losing access, being excluded, being criticized, being demoted, being attacked. But often the punishment is subtle: a cold tone, a delayed reply, a raised eyebrow, a shift in warmth, a loss of invitation, a rumor, a vague concern about attitude, a moral accusation, a sudden change in social atmosphere. These subtle consequences can shape behavior as powerfully as formal rules. This is particularly true in emotionally intelligent or values-based spaces, where punishment may not look like punishment. It may look like concern. We're just worried about your energy. You seem resistant. Maybe this is triggering something in you. You might need to reflect on why this is hard for you. Those sentences may sometimes be sincere, but they can also function as incentive pressure, stay aligned, or be psychologically interpreted. Incentive fields are not only external, they are internal too. Some people are rewarded internally by feeling morally clean, superior, needed, special, indispensable, victimized, or in control. A person may keep rescuing others because it gives them identity. They may keep arguing because winning gives them temporary relief from insecurity. They may keep exposing corruption because being the one who sees gives them status. They may keep overworking because exhaustion proves worth. They may keep choosing unavailable people because pursuit feels familiar, and familiar suffering is easier to recognize than unfamiliar peace. This is where discernment becomes more subtle. We must ask not only, what does the world reward, but also, what does my own wound reward? What emotional payoff do I receive from this pattern? Does it make me feel needed? Right? Safe? Superior? Loyal? Innocent? In control? Does it let me avoid grief, responsibility, uncertainty, or vulnerability? Again, the presence of an incentive does not automatically mean the behavior is false or bad. People can be rewarded for doing good things. Care can be genuine even if it also feels meaningful. Courage can be real even if it also brings status. Truth can be accurate even if it also gives identity. The point is not to reduce everything to hidden self-interest. The point is to make the reward visible so it does not secretly govern perception. Because once we can see the incentive, we can ask whether it is aligned with the truth. A major incentive in human behavior is attention. Attention tells the nervous system this matters. In the digital age, attention has become a reward structure of its own. What gets noticed gets repeated. What gets repeated becomes normal. If outrage gets attention, outrage increases. If vulnerability gets attention, vulnerability may become performance. If simplicity gets attention, complexity may be abandoned. If an accusation gets attention, the accusation becomes tempting. If fear gets attention, fear becomes a currency. This does not mean every intense post is manipulative. It means the attention economy changes the game. People may begin shaping their expression around what receives a response. Over time, the platform trains not only content, but personality. It rewards the version of the self that keeps the field engaged. Status is another powerful incentive. People may say they are arguing for truth, but the social reward may be status. Being seen as knowledgeable, being seen as morally correct, being seen as brave, being seen as emotionally evolved, being seen as independent, being seen as awake. When status is attached to belief or behavior, people may defend the status as much as the truth. This is why some conversations become unwinnable. The person is not only discussing an idea, they are protecting the position that the idea gives them. If admitting uncertainty would lower their status, certainty becomes incentivized. If changing their mind would make them look weak, rigidity becomes rational. If apologizing would reduce authority, defensiveness becomes strategic. Belonging may be even stronger than status. Human beings can sacrifice clarity to remain included. A group may not need to threaten anyone directly. It only needs to create a field where agreement brings warmth and doubt brings distance. The incentive becomes emotional safety. The person learns that belonging has terms. They may still think of themselves as independent, but their nervous system is tracking the cost of divergence. Safety is another incentive. Many behaviors that look irrational from the outside become understandable when viewed through safety. Someone stays quiet because speaking has never been safe. Someone becomes controlling because unpredictability feels dangerous. Someone over-explains because being misunderstood once led to punishment. Someone lies because the truth once cost too much. Some people pleasers because conflict once meant abandonment. The behavior may need to change. But if we do not understand the safety incentive, we may misread the person entirely. Control is another reward. Control can reduce anxiety. If a person can control the conversation, the schedule, the narrative, the emotional tone, the money, the information, or the social frame, they may feel safer. They may claim they are being responsible, organized, protective, or principled. Sometimes they are. But if control is rewarded by reduced anxiety, it may expand quietly until others lose agency. Certainty is also an incentive. Certainty feels good when uncertainty is intolerable. A group, ideology, relationship, or worldview that provides certainty may be reinforced not because it is fully accurate, but because it calms the body. This loops back to the earlier episodes. The nervous system may prefer a clear but false map over an accurate but uncertain one. So the incentive field is both external and internal, social and bodily, strategic and emotional. This is why discerning behavior requires several questions at once. What is being rewarded here? What is being punished? What is being avoided? What is being protected? What status is attached? What belonging is at risk? What does the body gain by repeating this pattern? What does the system gain by keeping the pattern in place? When we ask these questions, repeated behavior becomes more intelligible. Not always acceptable, but intelligible. We can stop being surprised that people keep doing the thing the system rewards them for doing. We can stop expecting honesty from systems that punish honesty. We can stop expecting vulnerability from relationships that weaponize vulnerability. We can stop expecting nuance from platforms that reward outrage. We can stop expecting cooperation where betrayal is profitable, but the purpose is not resignation. It is a redesign. If incentives shape behavior, then changing behavior often requires changing the reward structure. If a relationship wants honesty, honesty must be met with enough safety that it can survive. If a workplace wants initiative, initiative must not be punished. If a group wants truth, dissent must not cost belonging. If a platform wants better discourse, it cannot keep rewarding inflammatory simplicity. If a person wants healthier patterns, they must notice the hidden emotional rewards that keep old patterns alive. This is where discernment becomes active. It does not merely observe the game, it asks what would change it. What would make honesty safer? What would make cooperation rational? What would reduce the reward for manipulation? What would stop reinforcing withdrawal, outrage, compliance, or collapse? What would reward the behavior we claim to value? That last question is critical. If we say we value truth, do we reward honesty even when it is inconvenient? If we say we value care, do we reward people for having limits? If we say we value courage, do we reward respectful dissent? If we say we value growth, do we reward accountability rather than only image management? An incentive field reveals whether our values are embodied or merely declared. And that is the deeper lesson of this part. People adapt to what the field rewards. If the field rewards distortion, distortion will grow. If the field rewards performance, performance will grow. If the field rewards silence, silence will grow. If the field rewards courage, honesty, repair, cooperation, and clarity, those things become more possible. So when you are trying to understand behavior, look for the incentive field. Because repeated behavior is rarely random. Somewhere, somehow, the pattern is being fed. Cooperation and competition. When people are playing different games, if the incentive field shows us what a situation rewards, then the next question is, what kind of game are people actually playing? Because not every interaction has the same structure. Some situations are cooperative. Some are competitive. Some are mixed. Some begin as cooperation and slowly become competition because trust collapses. Others are presented as cooperative, while one person quietly protects their advantage. And many conflicts become confusing because people are not actually playing the same game. One person may enter the conversation trying to solve the problem. The other may be trying to win the argument. One person may be seeking repair. The other may be seeking control of the narrative. One person may be trying to understand what happened. The other may be trying to avoid blame. One person may be trying to create shared clarity. The other may be trying to protect their status. If we do not see this mismatch, we may keep speaking as if mutual understanding is the shared goal, when the actual game has shifted into defense, competition, or image management. A cooperative game asks, how do we both win? How do we preserve trust? How do we solve the problem together? How do we create long-term stability? How do we make truth safer rather than more expensive? Cooperation does not mean there is no conflict. It does not mean everyone agrees. It does not mean softness, passivity, or endless compromise. Cooperation means the problem is treated as something we are facing together, even when we disagree about it. A competitive game asks a different set of questions. How do I win? How do I protect my position? How do I avoid loss? How do I gain an advantage? How do I control the outcome? How do I prevent the other person from using vulnerability, honesty, uncertainty, or concession against me? Competition is not always wrong, either. There are situations where competition is real and necessary. Negotiation, sport, markets, political struggle, legal disputes, and strategic conflict, these can all contain competitive elements. The issue is not that competition exists. The issue is when the game is misread. Many painful situations arise because one person is playing cooperation and the other is playing competition. In a relationship, one person may say, I want us to understand what happened so we can repair. That is a cooperative frame. But the other person may hear the conversation as a threat to status, innocence, autonomy, or control. They begin defending, counterattacking, minimizing, or shifting blame. Now the interaction has two different games inside it. The first person keeps offering repair language. The second person keeps responding as if there is a winner and a loser. This creates exhaustion. The cooperative person may think, why can't we just talk about this? But the competitive person may not be trying to talk. They may be trying not to lose. They may be trying not to be wrong. They may be trying not to feel shame. They may be trying to preserve the version of reality in which they remain safe, good, superior, innocent, or in control. The same thing happens in workplaces. An employee raises a concern because they want the system to work better. They believe they are playing a cooperative game. Here is a problem, let us improve it together. Leadership, however, may experience the concern as a reputational threat. The game changes. Instead of asking, is the concern valid? Leadership asks, how do we contain the risk? The employee is no longer a contributor to improvement. They become a potential liability. The language may still sound cooperative. Thank you for your feedback. We value openness. But the behavior may reveal competition, distancing, subtle retaliation, vague criticism, exclusion from decisions, or reframing the employee as negative. This mismatch is crucial to discernment. If you think you are in a cooperative game, you may keep offering more honesty, more explanation, more goodwill, more context, more patience. But if the other side is playing a competitive game, your openness may become usable material. Your honesty may be used to weaken your position. Your uncertainty may be framed as incompetence. Your vulnerability may be treated as leverage. Your willingness to repair may be turned into responsibility for everything. This is why discernment asks, what game is actually being played here? Not what game is being advertised. Not what language is being used. Not what values are claimed. What game do the behaviors reveal? A cooperative game tends to increase clarity. It can tolerate questions. It can admit mistakes. It can separate behavior from character. It can hold mutual accountability. It can be repaired after rupture. It can say, I was wrong, without treating that as death. It can say, you have a point, without losing the self. It can say, let's understand this together and mean it. A competitive game tends to protect an advantage. It may avoid specifics, shift blame, control timing, manage appearances, hide information, use social pressure, punish honesty, or treat concessions as weakness. It may use emotionally intelligent language, but the effect is not mutual understanding. The effect is position protection. Sometimes the difference is visible in what happens when someone gives ground. In cooperation, concession is met with responsibility. If one person says, I can see where I contributed to this, the other person also becomes more open. Both move towards the truth. In competition, concession is exploited. If one person admits fault, the other person uses it as proof that the whole problem belonged to them. The concession becomes a weapon. After that, the person learns not to concede because the game punishes honesty. This is how competitive fields destroy vulnerability. If truth-telling is punished, people stop telling the truth. If apology is exploited, people stop apologizing. If uncertainty is mocked, people perform certainty. If kindness is taken as weakness, people harden. If cooperation is repeatedly met with advantage-taking, cooperation starts to feel irrational. This is one reason trust matters so much in game theory. Cooperation requires a basic belief that the other person will not use your cooperative move against you. If that belief collapses, self-protection becomes rational. Not necessarily ideal, but rational. If every honest admission is used to shame you, hiding becomes rational. If every boundary is framed as cruelty, silence becomes rational. If every vulnerability is stored for later use, emotional distance becomes rational. The game trains defense. This can happen at the level of whole cultures. Public discourse becomes competitive when every admission is punished, every uncertainty is mocked, every change of mind is treated as weakness, and every statement becomes material for attack. Under those conditions, people do not become more truthful. They become more strategic. They speak less plainly, they perform loyalty, they hide doubts, they exaggerate confidence, they avoid nuance, they wait to see what their side says before responding. The public game rewards positioning more than honesty. That is not a failure of individual intelligence alone. It is a failure of the incentive field. If the game punishes truth, truth becomes rare. In relationships, cooperation and competition often become tangled around emotional safety. Imagine two people having a conflict. One says, "I need you to understand how that affected me." The other hears, "I am being accused." If the second person cannot tolerate the shame of accountability, they may shift the game into competition. "Well, you do things too." Now the issue is no longer reparable. It is a balance of blame. Each person begins gathering evidence. The question becomes, who is more wrong? Who has more right to be hurt? Who started it? Who owes whom? Once the game becomes blame accounting, repair becomes harder. Both people may still say they want peace, but the game rewards defense. Each person protects their moral position. Each tries not to lose the argument. Even apologies become strategic. "I'm sorry, but..." Or "Fine, I'm sorry, are you happy now?" The apology is not a cooperative move towards repair. It is a move within a competitive frame, designed to end pressure or regain position. A cooperative relationship asks, "What happened between us, and how do we restore trust?" A competitive relationship asks, "Who is winning the moral case?" That distinction is everything. Families often operate through hidden games. A family may say, "We just want everyone to get along." That sounds cooperative. But the actual game may be image preservation. The person who names harm becomes the threat. The one who stays silent is rewarded as mature. The one who performs harmony is praised. The one who asks for accountability is labeled difficult. In that game, cooperation does not mean mutual truth. It means compliance with the family story. This is why the word peace needs discernment. Peace can mean genuine repair, but it can also mean the absence of visible conflict. A system may prefer quiet dysfunction to honest disruption. In that case, the cooperative language hides a competitive structure. The system competes against anyone who threatens the image. Social media is another field where cooperative and competitive games are often confused. Someone says they want dialogue, but the format rewards performance. The audience is watching. Likes, shares, status, belonging, and public approval become part of the game. A person may not be trying to understand. They may be trying to appear intelligent, moral, funny, fearless, superior, loyal, or victorious in front of the audience. The conversation becomes a stage. This changes everything. In private, someone might admit nuance. In public, they may perform certainty because certainty is rewarded. In private, they might ask a real question. In public, the question may become a trap. In private, correction might be accepted. In public, correction may feel like humiliation. The game is no longer only between two people. It includes the audience. This is where signaling enters, which we will explore more fully in the next part. But even here, we can see the game. When reputation is at stake, people often choose moves that protect image over moves that reveal truth. Politics operates similarly. The stated game is often public service, but the actual game may include power, party loyalty, donor influence, media optics, voter emotion, reputation, strategic timing, and opposition management. A politician may say, "We are doing what is right," but the discerning question is, what is being rewarded by the political field? Honesty? Long-term thinking? Or short-term emotional capture, cooperation, or polarization that strengthens identity and turnout? Again, this does not mean every actor is corrupt or insincere. It means the game matters. If the system rewards division, division will grow. If the system rewards spectacle, spectacle will grow. If the system punishes nuance, nuance will disappear. If cooperation gives opponents a strategic advantage, even necessary cooperation becomes difficult. This is why incentives can make good behavior irrational in a bad game. A person may want to cooperate, but if cooperation is punished, they will hesitate. A leader may want to tell the truth, but if truth destroys their position while performance preserves it, performance becomes tempting. A group may want internal accountability, but if admitting fault gives enemies ammunition, denial becomes strategically attractive. A partner may want vulnerability, but if vulnerability repeatedly leads to rejection, emotional distance becomes adaptive. The tragedy is that self-protection can become rational while also making the whole field worse. That is one of the central insights of game theory. Individual moves that make sense under mistrust can produce collective outcomes that harm everyone. If everyone hides because honesty is risky, trust collapses. If everyone performs with certainty because uncertainty is punished, truth collapses. If everyone competes because they fear exploitation, cooperation collapses. If everyone protects the image because admission is punished, accountability collapses. The game produces the culture. So what does discernment do with this? First, it asks, am I in a cooperative, competitive, or mixed game? A cooperative game does not mean there is no disagreement. It means both parties are oriented towards shared reality, shared repair, or shared outcome. A competitive game does not mean evil. It means interests are opposed or perceived as opposed. A mixed game contains both. People may genuinely want connection, but also protect status, genuinely want truth, but fear consequences, genuinely want cooperation, but not trust the other side enough to risk it. Second, discernment asks, does my strategy match the game? If you use cooperative vulnerability in a competitive field, you may be harmed. If you use competitive defensiveness in a cooperative field, you may destroy trust. If someone is genuinely trying to repair, and you treat them as an enemy, you may create the very conflict you feared. If someone is exploiting you and you keep offering openness, you may reinforce the imbalance. The skill is not to become hard or soft by default. The skill is to read the game accurately. Third, discernment asks, can the game be changed? Sometimes a competitive game can become cooperative if trust is rebuilt, incentives are changed, and both parties agree to new rules. A couple can decide, we are not going to use apologies as weapons. A workplace can decide, dissent will be protected, not punished. A group can decide, doubt will not cost belonging. A family can decide, truth matters more than image. A public conversation can decide, accuracy matters more than winning. But sometimes the game cannot be changed from inside, at least not by one person alone. If the other party benefits from competition, refuses mutuality, punishes honesty, exploits cooperation, and protects the current incentives, then discernment may require boundaries. You cannot cooperate your way out of a game where the other side is rewarded for taking advantage of your cooperation. That is a hard truth, but an important one. Compassion does not require strategic blindness. You can understand why someone behaves competitively and still refuses to keep playing. You can recognize their fear, history, or incentive field without offering yourself as material for their advantage. You can remain humane without becoming naive. The goal is not to become suspicious of every interaction. Many relationships are cooperative. Many people want to be repaired. Many groups can tolerate truth. Many workplaces can improve. Many conflicts are misunderstandings rather than strategic battles. But discernment asks us not to assume cooperation simply because cooperative language is being used. Look at what happens when the stakes rise. Can people admit fault? Can they share information? Can they tolerate your no? Can they respect uncertainty? Can they protect honesty even when it is inconvenient? Can they treat your vulnerability as something to honor rather than use? Can they seek a shared solution rather than personal victory? These are signs of cooperation. If instead questions are punished, admissions are exploited, boundaries are framed as attacks, honesty is used against you, uncertainty becomes weakness, and every conversation becomes a contest over who controls the meaning, then the game has shifted. Once you see that, you have more choices. You can name the game. You can refuse a role. You can change your strategy. You can stop rewarding the behavior. You can seek clearer agreements. You can protect against vulnerability. You can decide whether cooperation is possible. You can leave the field if the game requires you to lose yourself to stay. So the core insight of this part is simple. Many conflicts escalate because people are playing different games. One person is trying to repair. Another is trying to win. One person is trying to tell the truth. Another is trying to protect their reputation. One person is trying to cooperate. Another is trying not to be a fool. Discernment begins when we stop listening only to the words and start asking what game the behavior reveals. Signaling and reputation. Behavior as social communication, if cooperation and competition help us understand the game people are playing. Signaling helps us understand what people are communicating beyond the literal content of their words. Because human beings do not only communicate information, we communicate identity. We communicate loyalty. We communicate status. We communicate competence, morality, strength, victimhood, belonging, threat, independence, superiority, humility, sophistication, emotional depth, and social position. Sometimes this is conscious, sometimes it is not. But behavior often speaks to an audience, even when the person claims they are only speaking about the issue itself. This is why signaling matters in everyday discernment. A person may say they are expressing an opinion, but they may also be signaling group membership. They may say they are criticizing an idea, but they may also be signaling intelligence. They may say they are being honest, but they may also be signaling dominance. They may say they are staying neutral, but they may also be signaling strategic caution. They may say they are outraged because something is wrong, but they may also be signaling moral identity to the people watching. The statement may be true, and the signal may still be operating. That is the subtlety. Signaling does not mean everything is fake. It means behavior has layers. A person can genuinely care about an issue and also enjoy being seen as someone who cares. A person can genuinely value truth and also enjoy the status of being the one who exposes falsehood. A person can genuinely be hurt and also use the performance of hurt to gain social leverage. A person can genuinely be generous and also gain a reputation through generosity. Human beings are layered. Motives are often mixed. So discernment does not ask, is this entirely authentic or entirely performative? That question is usually too simple. The better question is, what is being signaled to whom, and what reward does the signal create? Public outrage is a common example. Sometimes outrage is appropriate. Some things deserve anger. Some injustices should not be met with calm indifference. But outrage also signals. It tells others, I am aware. I am morally awake. I am on the right side. I am not one of those people. I care enough to be angry. In a social field where moral expression is rewarded, outrage can become a form of reputation management. The person may not only be responding to harm, they may also be showing the group who they are. This is why public moral emotion can become contagious. Once a group begins signaling outrage, silence becomes suspicious. If you do not post, comment, condemn, or perform the correct emotional response quickly enough, people may wonder where you stand. The game shifts from private discernment to public identity display. The question becomes not only, what is true, but how do I show that I am the kind of person who sees this correctly? This does not mean public response is always an empty performance. Sometimes public speech matters. Sometimes silence can protect from harm. But signaling awareness helps us distinguish between moral courage and moral performance. Moral courage usually remains connected to truth, proportion, and action. Moral performance is more concerned with being seen in the correct posture. Reputation is the social reward attached to signaling. People learn which signals increase approval, attention, trust, status, desirability, safety, or group belonging. In one environment, skepticism may signal intelligence. In another, compassion may signal moral status. In another, emotional toughness may signal strength. In another, vulnerability may signal authenticity. In another, detachment may signal sophistication. In another, certainty may signal leadership. Every social field has preferred signals. In some groups, saying "I do not know" signals humility. In others, it signals weakness. In some spaces, emotional expression signals depth. In others, it signals instability. In some cultures, questioning authority signals courage. In others, it signals disrespect. In some communities, refusing to choose a side signals discernment. In others, it signals betrayal. The same behavior can carry different reputational meanings depending on the game being played. This is why discernment asks, who is the audience? A person may not behave the same way in private as they do in public because the audience changes the signal. In private, they may admit uncertainty. In public, they may perform with confidence. In private, they may express empathy for complexity. In public, they may condemn sharply because their group rewards certainty. In private, they may know the issue is nuanced. In public, nuance may cost status. So the public signal becomes stronger than the private truth. This is especially visible online. Social media creates constant audiences, and audiences change their behavior. A comment is no longer just a comment. It is a performance before witnesses. A disagreement is no longer only between two people. It becomes a display of intelligence, loyalty, humor, dominance, morality, or belonging. People often speak not to persuade the person they are replying to, but to signal to the people watching. This explains why online debates often become so unproductive. The participants may not be playing the game of mutual understanding. They may be playing the game of audience capture. A sharp insult may get more approval than a careful question. A simplistic certainty may travel further than a nuanced correction. A dramatic accusation may signal loyalty better than a balanced analysis. The platform rewards signals that hold attention, and the person adapts. Again, this is not just a moral failure of individuals. It is an incentive field. If the audience rewards performance, performance grows. If the platform rewards outrage, outrage grows. If the group rewards certainty, certainty grows. Over time, people may begin confusing the rewarded version of themselves with their authentic selves. This is one of the dangers of reputational feedback. We become what is repeatedly rewarded. A creator who receives attention for anger may become angrier. A commentator who receives praise for certainty may become less able to admit uncertainty. A person who receives approval for victimhood may begin organizing identity around injury. A person who receives status for being the rational one may become less able to admit emotion. A person who receives belonging for loyalty may become less able to question the group. The signal becomes identity. This connects directly back to episode 4, where we explored how identity captures intelligence. Signaling is one way identity becomes socially reinforced. It is not enough for the person to believe they are rational, compassionate, awake, skeptical, strong, or morally clean. The social field mirrors that identity back. The person signals, the group rewards, the identity strengthens. Then the person becomes more invested in maintaining the signal. This is why changing one's mind can become socially difficult. If someone has spent years signaling that they are the person who sees through a certain illusion, or belongs to a certain cause, or stands against a certain enemy, revision threatens reputation. It is not only a private update, it is a public identity risk. The person may worry, what will people think if I no longer signal the same certainty? Will I lose trust? Will I lose status? Will I look foolish? Will I be accused of betrayal? So the signal traps the person. Reputation can imprison belief. Signaling also appears in relationships. A person may be the calm one, the reasonable one, the wounded one, the emotionally intelligent one, the independent one, the generous one, the victimized one, the strong one, the one who does not need anything. These signals shape the relationship game. If someone signals calmness as superiority, the other person may be framed as emotional before the discussion begins. If someone signals victimhood, accountability may become harder because any challenge appears cruel. If someone signals independence, they may hide need. If someone signals generosity, they may build unspoken debt. In relationships, signals often become roles, and roles become expectations. One person is the rescuer, one is the problem, one is the rational one is the emotional one is the giver, one is the taker, one is the mature one is the difficult one. These roles may contain fragments of truth, but once they become fixed, they distort the field. The person in the rational role may stop examining their own emotional reactions. The person in the emotional role may have their valid perceptions dismissed. The giver may use sacrifice to gain moral leverage. The taker may internalize shame and stop asking for anything or rebel against the role. So discernment asks, what role is being signaled here and what does the role protect? A person may signal generosity because they fear rejection. They may signal toughness because vulnerability feels unsafe. They may signal emotional sensitivity because it gives them protection from challenge. They may signal detachment because caring feels humiliating. They may signal moral certainty because uncertainty feels like weakness. They may signal intellectual superiority because shame is too painful. Again, the signal may not be fake. It may be an adaptation. But if the signal controls the relationship, truth becomes harder to speak. Workplaces run heavily on signaling. People signal competence, loyalty, confidence, productivity, leadership potential, team spirit, calm under pressure, ambition, or alignment with organizational culture. Some of this is necessary. Work involves trust and reputation, but the problem appears when signaling becomes more rewarded than substance. A person may learn that looking busy matters more than doing meaningful work. Speaking confidently matters more than being accurate. Agreeing with leadership matters more than raising concerns. Performing resilience matters more than admitting overload. Using the right language matters more than behaving ethically. In such an environment, the game rewards image management. This creates a culture where people become strategic about appearance. Meetings become stages. Emails become reputation signals. Silence becomes risk management. Agreement becomes career protection. Dissent becomes carefully calculated. People may still care about doing good work, but the incentive field trains them to signal the right qualities rather than embody them fully. A discerning workplace asks, what signals are we rewarding, and are they aligned with the work we claim to value? Do we reward confidence over competence, busyness over effectiveness, loyalty over honesty, positivity over truth, polish over integrity, speed over thoughtfulness, emotional composure over emotional honesty? If the signals are misaligned, the culture will eventually become performative. Communities and movements also rely on signaling. Members signal belonging through language, symbols, shared enemies, approved phrases, emotional responses, and public stances. This can create cohesion, but it can also create conformity. The group may become more concerned with whether someone signals correctly than whether they are thinking clearly or acting ethically. This is why certain phrases can become badges. The right words show that you belong. The wrong hesitation marks you as a suspect. The group learns to read language as loyalty. Over time, people may become fluent in signaling alignment without necessarily practicing the values being signaled. This is particularly important in spaces that use moral, spiritual, therapeutic, or intellectual language. A person may signal healing without repair, signal compassion without patience, signal skepticism without openness, signal awakening without humility, signal safety while creating fear, signal truth while refusing correction. The signal can become a substitute for the substance. That is one of the key dangers. Signaling is not inherently bad. We need signals. Trust requires signals. Cooperation depends on knowing something about others' intentions, values, reliability, and commitments. A wedding ring signals commitment, a uniform signals a role, an apology signals repair. Eye contact may signal attention, consistent behavior signals safety. Public statements can signal accountability. Social signals help us coordinate. The problem is not signaling itself. The problem is when signals become detached from substance. When a person signals virtue without practicing responsibility, when a workplace signals well-being while rewarding burnout, when a group signals truth while punishing dissent, when a relationship signals intimacy while avoiding honesty, when a leader signals humility while protecting power, when a public figure signals care while seeking attention. Discernment does not reject signals. It checks whether they are backed by a pattern. Pattern is the test of signaling. Anyone can signal once. Anyone can say the right words, post the right statement, use the right language, perform the right emotion, display the right identity. But patterns reveal whether the signal is embodied. Does the person's behavior over time match the identity being performed? Does the group structure match its values? Does the apology lead to changed behavior? Does the workplace's well-being language affect workload and boundaries? Does the public moral stance translate into actual responsibility? Does the relationship's promise of honesty survive the difficult truth? This is why repeated behavior matters more than symbolic display. A signal is a claim. A pattern is evidence. Discernment asks us to compare them. There is also the question of costly signals. In game theory, a signal is more credible when it costs something to send. Saying, I value honesty is easy. Telling the truth when it risks status is costly. Saying, I care about well-being is easy. Reducing demands and protecting rest costs something. Saying, I respect boundaries is easy. Accepting a no without punishment costs something. Saying, I am accountable is easy. Changing behavior after criticism costs something. Saying, I value nuance is easy. Holding nuance when your group demands certainty costs something. Costly signals reveal commitment because they require the sacrifice of convenience, status, comfort, or advantage. This does not mean every good action must be painful. But it does mean we should pay attention to whether the signal costs anything, or only improves reputation. If a signal gives status without responsibility, it may be performance. If a signal requires the person to give up an advantage, it becomes more meaningful. For example, a leader who says they value feedback is signaling. A leader who protects the person who gives uncomfortable feedback sends a stronger signal. A partner who says they value honesty is signaling. A partner who remains present when honesty is difficult sends a stronger signal. A group that says it values truth is signaling. A group that corrects its own side when inconvenient sends a stronger signal. This is why discernment asks, what does this signal cost? Another question, what happens when the signal is tested? A person may signal calmness, but what happens when they are challenged? A group may signal openness, but what happens when someone disagrees? A company may signal ethics, but what happens when ethics reduce profit? A relationship may signal trust, but what happens when vulnerability appears? A movement may signal compassion, but what happens when compassion becomes inconvenient? Testing reveals whether the signal was identity performance or lived value. The purpose of this is not to become cynical. If we assume all signals are fake, we become blind in another direction. Some signals are sincere. Some people do mean what they say. Some public declarations matter. Some symbolic gestures open real change. Some expressions of identity are honest and courageous. But discernment keeps us from being hypnotized by the signal alone. It asks us to hold a gentle skepticism, not hostile, not cold, but awake. What is being signaled? Who is the audience? What reward does the signal create? What identity is being performed? What status is being protected? What belonging is being reinforced? What pattern supports or contradicts the signal? What does the signal cost? What happens when it is tested? These questions help us read behavior as social communication without reducing people to fraud or performers. They allow us to see the human need to be recognized, while also noticing how recognition can distort behavior. Because we all signal, we all want to be seen in certain ways. We all have identities we present, roles we inhabit, reputations we protect, and audiences we are aware of. The discerning person not only analyzes other people's signals, they ask, what am I signaling? What version of myself am I trying to maintain? Where do I perform certainty, care, intelligence, independence, morality, or strength, because the audience rewards it? Where has my signal become more important than my substance? That question brings signaling back into humility, because the danger is never only that others are performing. The danger is that we may become captured by our own performance. When that happens, behavior becomes less about truth and more about maintaining the signal. Discernment begins when we can let the signal be examined by the pattern, hidden motives, and strategic ambiguity. When the stated reason is not the full reason. If signaling shows us that behavior often communicates identity, reputation, loyalty, and status, then hidden motives take us one layer deeper, because people do not always know why they are doing what they are doing. And even when they do know, they may not name the full reason. Human behavior is rarely driven by one clean motive. More often, motives are layered. A person may be acting from care and control, honesty and aggression, protection and avoidance, justice and resentment, curiosity and undermining, neutrality and fear, helpfulness and the need to be needed. This is why discernment must move carefully. If we assume every motive is pure, we become naive. If we assume every motive is hidden manipulation, we become cynical. The greater skill is to recognize that the stated reason may be true, but incomplete. Someone says, I'm just being honest. That may be partly true. They may be naming something real. They may be refusing to lie. They may be trying to bring clarity into a foggy situation. But honesty can also become a cover for aggression. A person can use truth as a blade, not because the truth is false, but because the delivery carries punishment. The stated motive is honesty. The hidden reward may be dominance, relief from anger, humiliation of the other person, or the pleasure of finally saying what has been building inside them. Someone says, I'm protecting my peace. That may also be true. Sometimes stepping back is necessary. Sometimes refusing chaos is healthy. Sometimes distance protects nervous system capacity. But protecting peace can also become a respectable phrase for avoidance. A person may use it to escape accountability, avoid repair, refuse difficult conversations, or withdraw from discomfort while presenting the withdrawal as wisdom. The stated reason is peace. The hidden motive may be fear of conflict, shame, control, or an unwillingness to face the consequences of their behavior. Someone says, I'm holding you accountable. Again, this can be real. Accountability matters. Harm should be named. Patterns should be confronted. But accountability can also become dominance in moral clothing. It can become the act of forcing someone into shame, controlling the frame, demanding submission, or positioning oneself as morally superior. The stated reason is justice. The hidden reward may be status, revenge, control, or the clean self we explored in earlier episodes. Someone says, I'm helping. They may be. Help can be genuine, generous, and necessary, but help can also conceal control. Some people help because they cannot tolerate others making their own choices. Some help because being needed gives them identity. Some help because it gives them access. Some help because it creates debt. Some help because the helper role protects them from feeling powerless in their own life. The stated reason is care. The hidden reward may be superiority, dependency, or emotional security. Someone says, I'm staying neutral. Neutrality may be wise when facts are unclear, when emotions are high, or when the situation requires careful judgment. But neutrality can also conceal fear of consequences. It can become a way to avoid moral risk, preserve reputation, maintain access to both sides, or wait to see which position becomes safest. The stated reason is balance. The hidden motive may be self-protection. Someone says, I'm just asking questions. Sometimes they are. Questions are essential to discernment, but questions can also be used to undermine, imply, destabilize, or avoid stating a position openly. A question can be curiosity, or it can be an accusation in disguise. Are you sure that happened? May be a genuine clarification, or it may be a subtle attempt to make someone doubt themselves. Don't you think you're being a bit emotional? May sound like an inquiry, but function as a dismissal. The stated reason is curiosity. The hidden effect may be control of the frame. This is where strategic ambiguity enters. Strategic ambiguity is when someone leaves their motive, meaning, commitment, or position unclear enough to preserve advantage. They say just enough to influence the field, but not enough to be accountable. They imply without stating. They hint without committing. They withdraw without explaining. They flatter without promising. They criticize without naming the issue. They create emotional movement while retaining deniability. Ambiguity is not always manipulative. Life is ambiguous. Feelings are ambiguous. People need time to understand themselves. Not every unclear sentence is strategic, but ambiguity becomes strategic when it repeatedly protects one person from accountability while keeping others emotionally engaged, uncertain, or responsive. For example, someone may say, I just think people are starting to notice things. Notice what? Which people? What specifically? The phrase creates social pressure without evidence. Or someone says, I'm not saying you're wrong, I'm just saying it's interesting how you react. The statement implies a judgment without owning it. Or someone says, do whatever you want, while tone and behavior communicate punishment. The words offer freedom, the field creates consequence. Strategic ambiguity is powerful because it's the person influence without being pinned down. If challenged, they can retreat. That's not what I meant. You're reading into it. I was only asking. I never said that. You're being sensitive. Their ambiguity becomes a shield. They create emotional pressure, then deny responsibility for the pressure because nothing was stated clearly enough to challenge. This is why discernment asks us to look at the behavioral effect as well as stated intent. If a person repeatedly leaves others anxious, guilty, confused, or dependent while claiming innocent motives, the pattern matters. We do not have to prove hidden malice to recognize a harmful structure. Intent may be unclear, but effect can be observable. A useful question is, what does this ambiguity make possible? Does it allow the person to avoid commitment, avoid accountability, keep others waiting, create jealousy, maintain control, test loyalty, preserve multiple options, influence perception without taking responsibility? If the ambiguity consistently benefits one person while destabilizing another, it deserves examination. Hidden motives are not always sinister. Sometimes people conceal motives from themselves because the full truth would threaten their self-image. A person may genuinely believe they are offering advice out of care, while also being driven by anxiety and the desire to control. They may genuinely believe they are setting a boundary while also punishing someone. They may genuinely believe they are seeking truth while also seeking the status of being right. The motive is mixed, not purely fake. This is why we need subtlety. The goal is not to expose everyone as secretly corrupt. The goal is to recognize that human beings often act from multiple layers at once. One layer may be noble. Another may be defensive, one layer may be honest. Another may be strategic, one layer may be conscious. Another may be unconscious. Discernment does not require mind reading. It requires pattern reading. We cannot always know why someone did something, but we can observe what repeatedly happens. What does the behavior produce? Who benefits? What is avoided? What becomes harder to speak? What does the person do when asked for clarity? Do they welcome specificity or retreat into vagueness? Do their stated values match their repeated behavior? Does their explanation become clearer over time, or does it keep shifting? These questions keep us grounded. Without them, hidden motive analysis can become projection. We might start assigning motives based on our own wounds. They are doing this to hurt me. They want control. They are jealous. They are trying to undermine me. Sometimes these interpretations may be accurate. But if we move too quickly, we may create a story from activation rather than evidence. Hidden motives must be inferred carefully, from pattern, incentive, behavior, and context, not merely from the intensity of our feeling. So we need a disciplined approach. First, identify the stated reason. What does the person say they are doing? Honesty, care, justice, peace, neutrality, curiosity, loyalty, safety. Second, identify the behavioral effect. What happens after they do it? Does clarity increase or decrease? Does accountability move forward or disappear? Does the other person become freer or more constrained? Does the field become more honest or more pressured? Third, identify the incentive. What does the person gain by this behavior? Status, control, relief, attention, avoidance, belonging, sympathy, deniability, moral position, emotional safety. Fourth, identify the pattern. Does this happen repeatedly? Does the same stated reasoning, the same convenient outcome for the same person? Fifth, remain humble. The motive may be mixed. The person may not fully understand themselves. You may not have the whole picture. The goal is clarity, not accusation. This practice is especially useful in relationships. Suppose someone repeatedly says, I just need space, after difficult conversations. Space may be genuine. But if the person never returns to the conversation, then space functions as avoidance. The stated reason is regulation. The behavioral effect is disappearance. The incentive is avoiding accountability or discomfort. The pattern is unresolved conflict. A discerning response might be, I respect your need for space, but space needs a return point. Otherwise, it becomes avoidance. Or suppose someone says, I only criticize you because I want you to grow. Growth may be part of it, but if the criticism leaves the other person smaller, more ashamed, less confident, and more dependent on approval, then the effect matters. A discerning response might be, if this is about growth, the way it is being delivered needs to help me become clearer, not humiliated. In workplaces, hidden motives often hide behind professionalism. A manager may say, we need alignment when they mean do not challenge the decision. A colleague may say, I'm just raising concerns when they are protecting their status. A team may say, we value transparency while punishing the person who brings inconvenient information. The stated reason may contain truth, but the incentive field reveals more. In public life, hidden motives become even more layered. A politician may speak of safety while seeking power. A corporation may speak of empowerment while seeking profit. A media outlet may speak of public interest while seeking attention. A movement may speak of justice while also rewarding outrage, status, and conformity. Again, this does not mean every public claim is false. It means stated reasons must be read alongside incentives. This is where strategic ambiguity becomes a tool of power. Institutions often use vague language because specificity creates accountability. Mistakes were made. By whom? Lessons will be learned. Which lessons? We are committed to change. What change, by when, and how will it be measured? Ambiguity allows an appearance of responsibility without a clear mechanism of responsibility. It signals care while delaying consequences. The same pattern appears personally. I'll try. Try how? Things will be different. What will change? I didn't mean it like that. What did you mean? I care about you. How does that care become behavior? I'm working on myself. What does that work look like in the pattern? Specificity is the antidote to strategic ambiguity, not aggressive interrogation. Specificity. Behavior, time, pattern, action, return point. Consequence. If someone genuinely wants clarity, specificity helps. If someone benefits from ambiguity, specificity may be resisted. This is a key diagnostic point. When asked for clarity, does the field become clearer or foggier? A sincere person may struggle, but they usually move towards clarity. A strategically ambiguous person often shifts, deflects, reframes, or makes the request for clarity into the problem. Why are you interrogating me? You should trust me. You're being controlling. I already explained. Sometimes those responses may be valid if the questioning is excessive or hostile. But if basic clarity is repeatedly treated as a threat, something is being protected. Hidden motives also appear in ourselves. This may be the hardest layer. We may say, I am doing this for truth, but part of us may want to win. We may say, I am helping, but part of us may want to be needed. We may say, I am protecting my peace, but part of us may be avoiding repair. We may say, I am setting a boundary, but part of us may be punishing. We may say, I am staying silent to be wise, but part of us may fear consequences. Self-discernment asks, what is the full motive, not just the flattering one? This is not about self-attack. Mixed motives are human. The goal is not purity. The goal is honesty. If I can admit that my care contains control, I can loosen the control. If I can admit that my honesty contains anger, I can speak more clearly. If I can admit that my neutrality contains fear, I can decide whether silence is truly wise. If I can admit that my boundary contains punishment, I can refine it into integrity. The more honest we become about our own motives, the less easily we are captured by the hidden motives of others. We stop needing people to be completely pure or completely corrupt. We become better at reading complexity. We can say, this motive may be partly sincere, but the pattern still creates pressure. This person may genuinely care and still be controlling. This group may value truth and still reward conformity. I may be right about the issue and still be enjoying superiority. That is mature discernment. It sees both the human and the game. Because the stated reason is not always false, but it is not always the whole truth. The prisoner's dilemma in relationship and society. Trust, betrayal, and the fear of being the fool, one of the most useful ideas in game theory, is the prisoner's dilemma. In simple terms, it describes a situation where two people would both benefit from cooperation, but each fears that the other may betray, exploit, or take advantage of them. So each person is tempted to protect themselves, even though mutual self-protection can create a worse outcome for both. The classic example is framed around two prisoners being questioned separately. If both remain silent, both receive a lighter consequence. If one betrays the other while the other stays silent, the betrayer gains advantage and the silent one suffers more. If both betray, both end up worse than if they had cooperated. The logic is simple, but the emotional reality underneath it is deep. Cooperation requires trust, and when trust is uncertain, self-protection begins to look rational. That is why this idea matters far beyond theory. The prisoner's dilemma appears in relationships, workplaces, families, communities, politics, social media, and public life. Anywhere people must decide whether to cooperate, speak honestly, trust, risk vulnerability, share information, forgive, apologize, or act for the common good, this dilemma appears in some form. The core tension is this: if I cooperate and you cooperate, we both benefit. But if I cooperate and you exploit me, I become the fool. So if I do not trust you, I may protect myself first. But if you also do not trust me, you will protect yourself too. Now neither of us cooperates, and both of us lose something. This is one reason trust is so central to human behavior. Trust is not sentimental, it is strategic, emotional, relational, and embodied. Trust allows people to take cooperative risks, it allows honesty, it allows vulnerability, it allows repair, it allows patience. It allows people to act beyond immediate self-protection because they believe the other person will not punish them for it. When trust collapses, self-protection can become rational, but it also makes cooperation harder to restore. In relationships, this can be seen very clearly. Imagine two partners who both want closeness, honesty, and emotional safety. On the surface, they want the same thing, but both have been hurt before, and both fear being the one who risks first. One thinks, if I open up, they might dismiss me. The other thinks, if I admit I am hurt, they might use it against me. So both withhold, both wait, both tests, both protect. Both may interpret the other's protection as a lack of care. One partner becomes distant because they fear rejection. The other becomes anxious because of the distance. The anxious partner pushes for reassurance. The distant partner feels pressured and withdraws further. Now each person's self-protection becomes evidence for the other person's fear. The game reinforces itself. Both may want connection, but the structure rewards defense. This is a relational prisoner's dilemma. Mutual vulnerability would create repair. But vulnerability feels risky if the other person might respond with withdrawal, criticism, control, or indifference. So each person chooses a protective move. The protective move makes sense individually, but collectively, it damages the relationship. This is why repair requires more than good intentions. It requires a change in the game. Someone has to create enough safety for cooperation to become rational again. That might mean taking responsibility without weaponizing the other person's admission. It might mean responding to honesty with care rather than punishment. It might mean making clear agreements. It might mean showing consistency over time. It might mean proving through behavior that vulnerability will not be exploited. Trust is not rebuilt by demanding trust. It is rebuilt by changing the consequences of cooperation. If honesty has been punished, honesty must be protected. If vulnerability has been used against someone, vulnerability must be honored. If apology has been exploited, accountability must become mutual rather than one-sided. If silence has become safer than truth, the field must show that truth can survive. The same dilemma appears in workplaces. Employees may know that honesty could improve the organization. They may see problems clearly. They may have useful feedback, better ideas, or warnings about risks. But they also know that speaking honestly might damage their reputation, threaten promotion, irritate leadership, or mark them as negative. So they stay quiet. Each silence is rational. But collectively, the organization becomes less intelligent. Leadership may then say, "Why did no one raise this earlier?" But the answer may be because the game punished truth. In a healthy workplace, cooperation means information flows upwards and across. People can raise problems before they become crises. They can disagree without humiliation. They can admit uncertainty without being seen as incompetent. They can challenge a plan without being labeled disloyal. That kind of workplace makes cooperation rational. In an unhealthy workplace, the safest move may be impression management. Do not speak too clearly. Do not challenge too directly. Do not expose risk unless you can avoid blame. Do not tell the whole truth if the truth will make leadership uncomfortable. Again, people may not be cowardly. They may be responding to the game. This is why systems often become blind. Not because no one sees the truth, but because the incentive structure makes truth too costly to say. The prisoner's dilemma also appears in families. A family may need honesty to heal, but honesty may threaten the family story. Each member may know something is wrong, but no one wants to be the first to name it, because the one who names it may become the problem. So everyone performs peace. Everyone protects themselves. Everyone waits for someone else to risk the truth. The result is a family system where cooperation with reality is replaced by cooperation with silence. The same logic shapes public discourse. Many people would benefit from a culture where people could admit uncertainty, change their minds, correct errors, and speak with nuance. But if public admission is punished, people stop admitting. If changing your mind becomes social humiliation, people double down. If nuance is treated as weakness, people perform with certainty. If cooperation with the other side is framed as betrayal, polarization becomes rational. This is why social trust matters. In a low-trust environment, people become defensive before the conversation begins. They assume bad faith. They expect betrayal. They treat ambiguity as a strategy. They interpret concession as weakness. They do not want to be the fool. And because nobody wants to be the fool, everyone protects themselves in ways that make trust even harder. This is the tragic loop. Mistrust makes self-protection rational, and self-protection confirms mistrust. In politics, this can become entrenched. Each side may believe the other will exploit any concession. So compromise becomes dangerous. Admitting one's own side made an error becomes ammunition for opponents. Correcting misinformation from within the group becomes betrayal. The game rewards loyalty over truth, because truth may be used competitively. The public good suffers because everyone is playing to avoid being exploited. The same thing happens online. Someone may want to have a genuine conversation, but if they expect their words to be clipped, mocked, misrepresented, or used against them, they will speak defensively. They may become vague, performative, or aggressive. Others see defensiveness and assume bad faith. The field becomes less cooperative. The possibility of genuine dialogue collapses. This is why the fear of being the fool is so powerful. It is not only the fear of being wrong, it is the fear of being the one who trusted when others were playing strategy. The one who was honest while others were collecting advantage. The one who cooperated while others defected. The one who showed vulnerability while others used it as leverage. The one who followed the rules while others exploited them. That fear changes behavior. It can make people cynical. It can make them withhold. It can make them strike first. It can make them test others repeatedly. It can make them refuse to apologize, refuse to soften, refuse to admit uncertainty, refuse to cooperate, because cooperation feels like exposure. Yet, without cooperation, many of the things we most need cannot exist. Trust cannot exist without risk. Intimacy cannot exist without vulnerability. Honest workplaces cannot exist without protected truth. Healthy families cannot exist without someone being willing to break the silence. Functional societies cannot exist if every group assumes every other group will exploit good faith. So the question becomes, how do we cooperate without becoming naive? This is where discernment is essential. Cooperation should not mean blind trust. It should not mean endless forgiveness without pattern change. It should not mean exposing yourself repeatedly to someone who exploits openness. Cooperation requires evidence. It requires proportion. It requires reciprocity. It requires a pattern that shows the other person values mutual benefit over short-term advantage. A discerning person does not cooperate with everyone in the same way. They test the field. They observe what happens when they offer honesty. Do others respond with care or exploitation? What happens when they set a boundary? Is it respected or punished? What happens when they admit a mistake? Is repair created, or is shame used as leverage? What happens when they ask for clarity? Does the field become clearer or more confusing? These are not paranoid questions, they are trust-building questions. Trust is not simply given. It is learned through repeated interaction. This is why repeated games matter. In a one-time interaction, someone may be tempted to take advantage because there is no future cost. But in repeated relationships, cooperation can become more stable because people learn each other's patterns. If I know you will respond fairly over time, I can risk honesty. If you know I will not exploit your vulnerability, you can risk openness. If we both know we are returning to the relationship, the long-term reward of trust can outweigh the short-term reward of winning. But this only works if betrayal has consequences and cooperation is rewarded. If one person repeatedly defects and the other repeatedly forgives without change, the game rewards betrayal. If one person repeatedly withdraws and the other repeatedly pursues, the game rewards withdrawal. If one person repeatedly lies and the other repeatedly absorbs the cost, the game rewards dishonesty. Cooperation cannot survive where exploitation is endlessly protected. This is why boundaries are part of cooperation. A boundary is not the opposite of trust. A healthy boundary creates the conditions for trust by making the game clearer. It says, I am willing to cooperate, but not inside a structure where my cooperation is used against me. It protects the possibility of mutuality by refusing one-sided vulnerability. For example, in a relationship, someone might say, I want to be open with you, but I need to know that what I share will not be used against me later. That is not hostility. It is a condition for cooperative trust. In a workplace, an employee might say, I am willing to give honest feedback if there is a clear process that protects people from retaliation. That is not negativity. It is game design. In a family, someone might say, I am willing to have this conversation if we can stay with the issue rather than turning me into the problem for naming it. That is not a disruption. It is an attempt to make truth possible. Trust is built when cooperation is met with cooperation. When someone takes a risk towards honesty and the other person responds with integrity, the game changes. The nervous system learns, truth can survive here. Vulnerability can survive here. Boundaries can survive here. Repair can survive here. Over time, cooperation becomes safer because the evidence supports it. But if the risk is punished, discernment must record that too. The mistake many people make is treating trust as a moral obligation rather than a pattern-based conclusion. They think, if I were a good person, I would trust. But trust is not goodness. Trust is an assessment of reliability. It is built on evidence. It can be offered gradually, repaired after rupture, and withdrawn when the pattern no longer supports it. This is why trust and discernment belong together. Without trust, everything becomes strategic. Without discernment, trust becomes gullibility. Mature trust requires both openness and pattern recognition. So when we apply the prisoner's dilemma to everyday life, we are not reducing love, work, family, or politics to cold calculation. We are recognizing a real human tension. Cooperation can create better outcomes, but cooperation requires vulnerability. Vulnerability creates risk. Risk requires trust. Trust depends on the pattern. Pattern depends on incentives. Incentives can be changed, but only if we are willing to see the game clearly. The central question is not simply, should I cooperate? The better question is, what conditions would make cooperation wise? Is there reciprocity? Is there a repair? Is there accountability? Is there a shared reality? Is there protection against exploitation? Is there a willingness to change the pattern? Is there enough trust to risk the next cooperative move? And if not, what would need to change? Because when trust collapses, self-protection may become rational. But if self-protection becomes permanent, the field becomes lonely, defensive, and closed. The work is to rebuild conditions where cooperation is not naive, but grounded. That is the deeper lesson of the prisoner's dilemma. The fear of being the fool can keep us safe in the short term, but if everyone is too afraid to risk cooperation, everyone loses something human. Field scenario, applied game analysis. This is where we bring the episode into a practical field scenario, because game theory becomes much clearer when we stop treating it as an abstract model and start watching how behavior adapts inside a real environment. The question is not only what people say they value, but what the system actually rewards. Once we see the rewards and punishments, behavior that once looked confusing often becomes more intelligible. Imagine a workplace team, a creative organization, a community project, or even a values-led company. On paper, the culture sounds healthy. The stated values are openness, collaboration, honesty, emotional intelligence, shared responsibility, and innovation. Leadership says, we want people to speak up. Meetings include language about transparency. Feedback is supposedly welcome. The group wants to see itself as mature, modern, inclusive, and cooperative. But over time, a different pattern appears. When someone raises a concern, the atmosphere changes. If they question a decision, they are told they are being negative. If they point out a risk, they are seen as obstructive. If they ask for clarity, they are treated as difficult. If they disagree with leadership in a meeting, the conversation becomes colder afterwards. They may not be punished directly, but they feel it. Fewer invitations, less warmth, a vague comment about attitude, a subtle shift in reputation. Nobody says, do not speak honestly. The game teaches it. This is the incentive field. The stated value is openness. The actual reward is alignment. The stated value is collaboration. The actual reward is agreement. The stated value is honesty. The actual reward is emotional and professional safety for those who do not disturb the image of harmony. So people adapt. They stop raising concerns in public. They share doubts privately but remain quiet in meetings. They learn which topics are safe and which are not. They become skilled at softening their language. Instead of saying this plan has a serious flaw, they say, I wonder if there might be a small area we could revisit. Instead of saying this deadline is unrealistic, they say, it may be worth exploring capacity. Instead of saying people are afraid to speak openly, they say nothing, because naming the fear would expose them to the very consequence they are describing. Publicly, everyone appears aligned. Privately, resentment grows. Leadership then looks around and sees silence. They interpret silence as agreement. They may genuinely believe the team is on board. They may say no one raised concerns at the time, but this is where game analysis matters. Silence does not always mean consent. Silence may mean the cost of honesty is too high. In this scenario, the first question is, what game is being played? The advertised game is cooperation. Everyone is supposedly working together towards shared clarity. But the real game is reputation management. Team members learn to protect themselves. Leadership learns to protect its image. The group learns to maintain the appearance of unity. The cooperative language remains, but the behavioral incentives create a competitive field. Protect your position. Do not become the difficult one. Do not risk social standing. Do not threaten the leadership frame. The second question is, what behavior is rewarded? Agreement is rewarded. Positivity is rewarded. Smoothness is rewarded. The ability to raise concerns without making anyone uncomfortable may be rewarded, but only if the concern does not disturb power. Public loyalty is rewarded. Emotional composure is rewarded. The person who says that sounds good is safer than the person who says I think this will fail unless we change it. The third question is, what behavior is punished? Directness is punished. Dissent is punished. Naming patterns are punished. Asking uncomfortable questions is punished. Not always through formal discipline, but through social consequences, cooling, exclusion, labels, suspicion, or reputation damage. This is important because informal punishment often shapes behavior more powerfully than official policy. People do not need a written rule to know what will cost them. The fourth question is, who benefits from the current structure? Leadership benefits because their decisions face less visible resistance. The group image benefits because conflict stays hidden. Individuals who are skilled at alignment benefit because they appear cooperative. People who dislike discomfort benefit because difficult truths remain unspoken. But the organization as a whole suffers. Problems go unaddressed. Risks are hidden. Innovation weakens. Trust erodes. The system becomes less intelligent because the truth is filtered before it reaches the people who need it. This is a classic example of stated values colliding with real incentives. Now imagine the same pattern inside a relationship. A couple says they value honesty. They say they want emotional intimacy. They say, we should be able to tell each other anything. But whenever one partner shares something difficult, the other withdraws, becomes cold, turns the issue back on them, or collapses into hurt so completely that the original truth disappears. After a while, the honest partner adapts. They edit themselves. They time conversations carefully. They soften everything. They stop saying certain things because they do not want to trigger withdrawal. They may still love the other person. They may still want intimacy. But the game has taught them, honesty creates distance. Performance preserves closeness. Again, the stated value is honesty. The actual reward is emotional management. The relationship claims intimacy but rewards self-editing. From a game theory perspective, this is not simply a communication problem. It is an incentive problem. If truth leads to punishment, truth becomes irrational. If pleasing leads to warmth, pleasing becomes rational. If silence avoids conflict, silence becomes reinforced. The relationship may then wonder why it feels distant, but the answer is in the game. The conditions for honesty were never made safe. Now, how do we reconstruct either scenario through discernment? First, identify the stated values. What does the system claim to value? Openness, honesty, care, collaboration, emotional maturity, shared purpose. Second, identify the actual rewards. Who receives approval? Who receives warmth? Who advances? Who is protected? What behaviors make life easier inside the system? Third, identify the punishments. What causes cooling, shame, exclusion, retaliation, conflict, withdrawal, or reputation damage? What truths become expensive? Fourth, examine silence. What does silence mean here? Is silence genuine agreement, or is it strategic self-protection? Are people quiet because they are content, or because speaking has been trained out of them? Fifth, ask whether cooperation is possible under the current incentive field. If honesty is punished, cooperation is fragile. If vulnerability is exploited, intimacy becomes performance. If dissent costs belonging, truth becomes private. If leadership cannot tolerate challenge, collaboration becomes theater. Sixth, ask what would need to change for the game to change. In the workplace, honesty would need protection. Leadership would need to reward uncomfortable feedback, not only polite agreement. Concerns would need clear channels. People who speak the truth respectfully would need to be treated as contributors, not threats. Mistakes would need to be examined without humiliation. The system would need to prove that openness is more than a value statement. In the relationship, the difficult truth would need to be met differently. A partner would need to show that honesty will not automatically lead to withdrawal, punishment, or emotional reversal. There may need to be agreements. If one of us needs space, we return to the conversation. If one of us shares a hard truth, we do not use it later as a weapon. If we feel defensive, we name that state rather than turning it into blame. Changing the game requires changing what happens next. This is the most important line in applied game analysis. Behavior changes when consequences change. If the same behavior keeps receiving the same reward, the pattern will continue. If withdrawal brings pursuit, withdrawal continues. If outrage brings attention, outrage continues. If silence brings safety, silence continues. If manipulation brings control, manipulation continues. If honesty brings punishment, honesty disappears. So applied game analysis asks, what are we reinforcing without realizing? A leader may complain that no one speaks honestly while rewarding those who agree. A partner may complain that the other is distant while punishing vulnerability. A group may complain that people lack courage while shaming dissent. A public culture may complain about shallow discourse while rewarding outrage and speed. The solution is not merely to demand better behavior. It is to change the game that makes the current behavior rational. This does not remove personal responsibility. People still make choices, but it reveals why repeated behavior is rarely random. If a pattern keeps appearing, somewhere the system is feeding it. The discerning person learns to read the field. What is the game? What is rewarded? What is punished? Who benefits? Who adapts? What becomes unspeakable? What would change the incentives? Is cooperation actually possible, or is cooperation only being advertised while competition is being rewarded? That final question is crucial, because many systems speak the language of cooperation while rewarding self-protection. Many relationships speak the language of intimacy while rewarding emotional management. Many workplaces speak the language of innovation while rewarding conformity. Many groups speak the language of truth while rewarding loyalty. Applied game analysis helps us see the difference. Once we see the difference, we can make clearer choices, stay and try to change the incentives, set boundaries, refuse the role, stop reinforcing the pattern, or leave the game entirely if the structure requires self-betrayal. Because sometimes the problem is not that people do not know the values. Sometimes the problem is that the game rewards the opposite. The strategic discernment practice, reading incentives without losing humanity. If game theory helps us see incentives, rewards, punishments, signaling, hidden motives, trust, and cooperation, then we need a practice that helps us read the game without becoming cold, cynical, or suspicious of everyone. We can call this practice the incentive check. The first question is, what is the stated value? What does the person, group, workplace, relationship, or system claim to care about? Honesty, openness, safety, well-being, truth, loyalty, innovation, peace, intimacy, justice, freedom, collaboration. This matters because stated values reveal the story a system tells about itself. The second question is, what behavior is actually rewarded? Not what is praised in language, but what receives approval, warmth, status, attention, promotion, belonging, protection, or relief from conflict. If a workplace claims to value creativity but rewards compliance, compliance is the real game. If a relationship claims to value honesty but rewards silence, silence is being trained. The third question is, what behavior is punished? What leads to shame, withdrawal, exclusion, reputation damage, conflict, loss of access, or being labeled difficult? Sometimes the punishment is direct. Sometimes it is subtle, a cold tone, a delayed reply, a vague concern, a loss of warmth. These consequences teach people what is safe. The fourth question is, who gains from the current pattern? Who benefits when things stay this way? Who gains status, control, comfort, attention, emotional safety, or protection from accountability? This does not mean assuming bad motives. It simply asks what the structure preserves. The fifth question is, what does each person risk by being honest? In many systems, honesty is not equally risky for everyone. The person with less power may risk more. The person challenging the frame may risk more. The person naming the pattern may become the problem. If truth has a high cost, people will adapt. The sixth question is this cooperative, competitive, or mixed? Are people working towards shared clarity or protecting position? Is repair possible, or is the conversation really about winning? Is vulnerability safe, or does it become leverage? Naming the game prevents us from offering cooperation where the field rewards exploitation. The seventh question is, what is being signaled? Is someone communicating care, virtue, loyalty, intelligence, victimhood, authority, neutrality, or moral status? And who is the audience? Signals are not always false, but they should be tested against a pattern. The eighth question is, what would change the game? If honesty is punished, what would make honesty safer? If outrage is rewarded, what would stop feeding it? If withdrawal brings pursuit, what would interrupt the loop? If silence is mistaken for agreement, what structure would allow truth to be spoken? This practice should not make us reduce people to a strategy. People are emotional, wounded, relational, embodied, and often unaware of their own motives. But it should stop us from ignoring incentives because repeated behavior is rarely random. Somewhere, somehow, the pattern is being rewarded. Discernment sees both the humanity and the game. It asks not only what do they feel or what do they say, but also, what does this field teach people to do? And when we can see that, we can choose more consciously whether to play, change the rules, set a boundary, or step away. Integration, seeing the game without becoming a player of it. So, as we come towards the close of this episode, we return to the central movement we have been making, learning to see the game beneath behavior without reducing human beings to nothing but strategy. Game theory gives us a powerful lens, but it is not the whole human story. People are not only incentive machines, they are emotional, embodied, wounded, relational, hopeful, defensive, frightened, loyal, ambitious, loving, confused, and often unaware of the deeper rules shaping their own behavior. But if we ignore incentives, we miss something essential. We may keep listening to stated values while the real game continues underneath. A person may say they value honesty, but if honesty is punished, honesty will disappear. A workplace may say it values creativity, but if compliance is rewarded, creativity becomes performance. A relationship may say it wants intimacy, but if vulnerability is met with withdrawal, self-editing becomes rational. A group may say it values truth, but if loyalty earns belonging and doubt creates suspicion, truth becomes socially expensive. This is what game theory helps us see. Behavior is shaped not only by intention, but by consequence. People adapt to what the field rewards. They adapt to what protects them from shame, rejection, punishment, loss, exposure, or status damage. They adapt to what gives them attention, belonging, approval, safety, influence, control, or relief. Once we see that, we stop being surprised that people often behave in ways that contradict their stated values. The contradiction is not always hypocrisy in the simple sense. Sometimes it is adaptation. Sometimes it is fear. Sometimes it is a strategy. Sometimes it is self-protection. Sometimes it is a survival pattern that has become socially rewarded. Sometimes the person genuinely believes in the stated value, but the game they are inside rewards the opposite. This is why discernment asks, what is being rewarded here? That question cuts through performance. It asks us to look at what actually happens after someone speaks, acts, challenges, withdraws, complies, performs, or tells the truth. Who receives warmth? Who receives attention? Who gains status? Who becomes safer? Who becomes more powerful? Who is protected from consequence? Who gets to remain comfortable? Then we ask, what is being punished? What happens when someone names the pattern? What happens when someone refuses the role? What happens when someone asks for clarity? What happens when someone tells the truth too directly? What happens when someone sets a boundary? What happens when someone does not perform certainty, loyalty, positivity, calmness, or agreement? Often, the punishment is not formal. It may be a cold atmosphere, a vague accusation, exclusion, silence, reputation damage, withdrawal, shame, or being labeled difficult. But subtle punishments still train behavior. Then we ask, what game am I being invited into? Am I being invited into cooperation or into competition disguised as cooperation? Am I being invited into repair or into blame accounting? Am I being invited into dialogue or into a public performance? Am I being invited into honesty or into a structure where honesty will be used against me? Am I being invited into a relationship, workplace, group, or conversation where the advertised rules are different from the lived rules? This question matters because we cannot respond wisely if we misread the game. If we treat a competitive field as cooperative, our openness may become leverage. If we treat a cooperative field as competitive, our defensiveness may destroy trust. Discernment is not about becoming hard by default. It is about reading the field accurately enough to know what kind of response is proportionate. Then we ask, is cooperation actually possible? Not theoretically. Not because everyone says the right words, but practically. Can the other person admit fault? Can the system tolerate truth? Can the group survive dissent? Can vulnerability be honored rather than exploited? Can boundaries be respected? Can incentives be changed? Can the field become safer for honesty, or does it depend on silence? If cooperation is possible, the task may be to redesign the game. Create clearer agreements. Reward honesty. Protect dissent. Stop reinforcing withdrawal, outrage, manipulation, or self-abandonment. Make repairs safer. Make truth less costly. Make accountability mutual rather than theatrical. But sometimes cooperation is not possible from the position we are in. Sometimes the other person benefits from the current structure. Sometimes the group protects the frame. Sometimes the workplace rewards the very behavior it claims to oppose. Sometimes the relationship asks for honesty, but punishes every honest moment. In those cases, discernment may require boundaries, distance, refusal, or leaving the field. So we ask, what happens if I refuse to play? This may be the most revealing question. If you stop chasing someone who withdraws, what happens? If you stop rewarding outrage with attention, what happens? If you stop pretending agreement, what happens? If you stop accepting vague criticism, what happens? If you stop overfunctioning, what happens? If you stop playing the role that keeps the system comfortable, what happens? The response will often show you the structure. A healthy field may adjust. It may feel discomfort, but it can respond. A controlling field may escalate. It may shame, punish, isolate, accuse, or try to pull you back into the old game. That reaction provides information. Then we ask, what would change the incentives? If we want different behavior, we cannot only demand different behavior while keeping the same rewards in place. If silence is safer than honesty, honesty will not grow. If outrage brings more attention than nuance, outrage will increase. If withdrawal brings pursuit, withdrawal will continue. If manipulation brings control, manipulation will be reinforced. If overwork brings praise, burnout will become culture. To change behavior, the game must change. That may mean refusing to reward old patterns. It may mean protecting truth tellers. It may mean changing the consequences of honesty. It may mean creating return points after conflict. It may mean making boundaries normal rather than dramatic. It may mean rewarding cooperation, humility, accuracy, repair, and actual substance rather than performance. This is where discernment becomes active. It does not merely observe the game. It asks whether the game can be made more honest. Episode 6 opened Arc 2, The Strategic Human, by shifting the series from the distortion of perception into the strategic logic of behavior. We explored incentives, reward structures, cooperation, competition, signaling, reputation, hidden motives, strategic ambiguity, and the prisoner's dilemma in everyday life. The central lesson is simple. Repeated behavior is rarely random. Somewhere, somehow, the pattern is being fed. The discerning person learns to see both the humanity and the game. They do not reduce people to strategy, but they do not ignore the incentives shaping behavior. They ask what the system rewards, what it punishes, what it makes rational, and what it makes costly. Sometimes people do not behave according to the values they declare. They behave according to the game they are in. In the next episode, we continue deeper into Arc 2, The Strategic Human, with Episode 7, Control Theory and Human Behavior. If game theory helps us understand incentives and strategic behavior, control theory takes us into feedback loops, reinforcement, conditioning, reward, punishment, social engineering, and the ways systems train behavior over time. Because once we understand the game, the next question is, how does the system keep people playing it? How does a behavior become reinforced? How does a pattern become stable? How does a relationship keep reproducing the same conflict? How does a workplace train compliance? How does a platform train attention? How do groups train loyalty, outrage, silence, certainty, or obedience? How do rewards and punishments shape not only what people do, but what they eventually believe is normal? That is where we go next. Episode 7 will ask how behavior is shaped by feedback, how systems correct, reward, suppress, amplify, and condition people until the pattern begins to run almost by itself. So, as you leave this episode, consider one question. What behavior is being rewarded in the games you are currently inside? Perhaps a second. What part of you keeps playing because the game gives you something, even if it also costs you something? Not to blame yourself, not to become cynical, but to see clearly, because once the game becomes visible, the next move becomes more conscious. May you learn to see incentives without losing compassion. May you recognize strategy without becoming suspicious of every human gesture. May you know when cooperation is real, when competition is hidden, and when the rules need to change. May you stop rewarding what harms you, and may your discernment become strong enough to see the game without becoming lost inside it. Until next time, thank you for joining me today. You've been listening to the Discernment Field, Episode 6, Game Theory in Everyday Life, Incentives, Strategy, and the Hidden Logic of Behavior. I'm James Miller.